Hello and welcome to this episode of the Event Manager Podcast, the podcast for event professionals who want to stay out of the game by hearing from the leading innovators in the event industry. My name is Miguel Neves and I'm the editor-in-chief of EventMB. In this episode, titled Taking the Stress Out of Conference Planning, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Atkinson, co-founder of Lineup Ninja. In this episode, we cover some great topics around stress, technology, conference planning, and much more. We talk about how bad event experiences can lead to important insights. We talk about how Joe's unique IT and events background led him to create an event tech tool. We talk about the compounding challenges around stretched workforces asked to do more. And we talk about why event tech vendors dream of creating SaaS products and why that doesn't work for the event industry. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out the other episodes of the Event Manager Podcast with tips and insights from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all the episodes on our website, or you can subscribe through your favorite podcast service. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Event Manager Podcast. I am joined by none other than Joe Atkinson, the co-founder of Lineup Ninja. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Miguel. Happy New Year.
Yes, indeed. Happy New Year.
It's a lovely sunny day here, so I'm feeling all kind of bright and joyful and full of the joys of, well, not quite spring, but, you know.
Hopefully. The days are getting longer, so it's all positive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Good. So Joe, we met a few years ago. I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, and I've kind of followed your journey in this startup world. But for people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about who you are and how did you get to be you? How did we get to where you are today?
Right. So, well, I guess, yeah, I'm the founder of this software startup called Lineup Ninja. And I got into that really because I'd previously done some work in events, organizing some fairly complex events, and actually found it pretty difficult. It's no lie that managing events is really stressful, and it's a very complex role. And I found that. Yeah, I found that was absolutely the case, that when I was trying to organize events, I found it was very complex, lots of moving parts, quite a lot of data and information to keep track of. And I found that the tools that I was using, which were kind of things that lots of people use, email, spreadsheets, maybe some databases and CRM systems, weren't quite doing it for me. And so that's why I ended up starting the company. But before that, I had a background in tech. So I kind of studied computer science and went off and worked for an ISP as an engineer looking after clients' infrastructure. Got a little bit disillusioned with working for big corporate tech. This is around about 2007, something like that. And at the same time, there were a lot of stories in the media around, we'd become much more concerned about climate change. There was a lot of discussion about fossil fuel resources potentially becoming more scarce in the future. So I became really interested in sustainability. So I kind of had been working in tech, got interested in all this sustainability stuff, and went off, had a bit of a change of career, and went off and worked for this tiny little environmental charity that's based in Leeds, where I live, and ended up doing education and events stuff for them. So I've got this tech background, then get into events. And so I'm running events for them, and I'm looking at the tech that I'm using. I'm using spreadsheets and emails and stuff. I think, I know there's a better way of doing this because I've got my tech background. But by this point, my tech skills are a little bit rusty. So I kind of hooked up with an old colleague of mine and pitched him this idea for a little side project, which was, I just wanted to build it was going to be a really simple little website where you could put your conference agenda into it. You can drag and drop your sessions around, and it would tell you, oh, don't put that session there. That speaker said he's not going to be there on that day, or something. Or this session can go in here because the speaker has asked for a projector and there's one in that room. So I had a really simple, nicely, tightly scoped idea for this little project we were going to do together. fast forward 5 or 6 years in this kind of business. So yeah, that's how I got where I am.
So IT in the background, then you have kind of meeting planning, conference organizing as sort of part of a role that wasn't really, you didn't really join the event industry. You just sort of had to organize events as part of your role, right? And then kind of found your way or struggled your way through using spreadsheets and things like that. I'm sure you're not alone. I'm sure others listening will have had similar experiences. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Now, I also know that recently you asked me for a quote for a book that you were writing, which is what's it called? The Event Content Management book. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what your objective with it is.
Okay. So I didn't really start out with the intention to write a book necessarily. When we were starting Lineup Ninja and I came into really started getting into the events industry more seriously, I was very conscious that while I'd organized events in the past, I'd felt very much like an industry outsider. So I was kind of trying to understand the industry. And the product that we developed was really to meet my own personal pain point that I'd experienced. But as we brought it to market, we realized, we needed to speak to people who were organizing academic conferences, which I didn't really feel I knew that much about. And we really started to gain some traction with exhibition organizers, people who are doing trade shows where they've got a big speaker program. They were really seeing value in the product. And I felt a bit like, well, actually, I need to know more about this. I need to know more about the challenges that are being faced by exhibition organizers, particularly around this, how do you organize the conference at an exhibition? Because it's quite a different thing to organizing a scientific conference. The processes are quite different. Unfortunately, where I live in Leeds, and indeed my old university, Leeds Beckett University, is the home of the UK Centre for Event Management. So I was 2 miles from where I'm sitting is that university's library. So I wandered over to my university library and had a look through all the event management books that they've got there to try and do a bit of my own desk research to find out more about what's going on with these exhibition organizers and how are they trying to organize their speaker programs. And I looked at book after book after book on event management, and nobody was writing about this at all. So there's some great event management books out there, but no one's talking about the nuts and bolts of how you put together a speaker program. So I thought, well, that's interesting. There's a big gap in the literature there. So I just, through the course of conversations with our own clients and attending lots of trade shows, taking Lineup Ninja to the events industry, I just made quite a lot of notes about what I was seeing in terms of what our clients are trying to do, how we were engaging or being asked to engage with trade shows, and just had some fairly comprehensive notes. And then as the pandemic hit and everything got a bit quieter, I had a bit of time on my hands. So basically just wrote up my notes into a book, and that's it. That's kind of how it came about, really. And I figure the main... Sorry, go on.
Well, what do you think? What was the main bit that was missing that really made you think like this is really needed in the space? One
of the things that I've seen is that the speaker program at trade shows can sometimes be seen as a bit of a kind of add-on. So at exhibitions, the core business really is selling. If we're speaking in the kind of the physical world, the main business is selling square meters, right? It's about getting exhibitors in to sell their products to their clients, or it's about organizing meetings if you've got like a hosted buyer program and all that kind of thing. It's really about that, putting your exhibitors in front of their clients. And the speaker program is kind of the way some organizers approach it. It's kind of an add-on, or it's seen as, well, it's a good way to get some bodies into the building. It's a way to attract the audience so that in turn will attract our exhibitors. So it can sometimes be a little bit deprioritized, and it can be given to more junior members of the team, or it can be delegated to newer staff. So what I was thinking with the book is actually it'd be really good if there's a guide that's a little bit more than just a kind of, because there are a few marketing guides out there from some of our competitors that are really good. It's like here's how to do a good call for speakers form, or here's how to write a good speaker agreement. So there's some really good practical hints and tips, but there isn't like an overall explanation of what the point of a speaker program is, or like a primer. So that was who I thought the primary audience is. People who are fairly new to the industry and they get dropped into their lap. You're going to organize a speaker program for this conference and there's going to be 100 speakers and you need to do it all. I thought it'd be good if there was like a reference resource for them to just be able to say, right, what am I trying to do here?
It is interesting how you can find all this information online, but sometimes nobody's connected the dots, or at least you can't find a nice way to connect the dots automatically, right? So I think that's kind of what I'm hearing is you wanted to tell the picture and put it in context, right? It's nice to find a resource that says this is how to send a speaker email or something like that. But if you don't understand why that's important and then when you should do that, then having the details doesn't really help you really.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I guess one of the other things is some of the organizers that we work with are really savvy in terms of they'll use their speaker program or the process of gathering speakers as a way to upsell some other like bits of advertising or more stand space, or possibly they'll have some sessions which are paid for, like round table events or something like that. So when people are asking to speak at their event, they'll then ask them, well, are you already exhibiting, or are you interested in finding out more about exhibiting? And so there is actually a commercial angle to all this activity, which if you're new to the industry and you're just told, just get some speakers, you might not be thinking about it in that slightly more commercial or strategic way. So I weave some of that stuff into the book as well.
Really interesting. Well, I think, we'll add in the show notes where people can download the book or where people can buy the book. Is it free? Is it paid for? How are you doing the book?
It's free at the moment. I think when I do a second edition, it's probably going to be expanded quite a bit. And at that point, we'll have a look and we might charge for it then.
Maybe you'll have some big publishers coming after you asking for the rights, and then you can make it into university text, right?
Yeah. Chance to be a fine thing.
Yeah, good. Cool. So let's get back into the event industry. You've been working in it directly or indirectly for a while now. What keeps you engaged? Like, what makes you really enjoy the event industry?
At the risk of sounding really cliched, and I'm sure everyone answers this question the same way, the people are amazing. Just the dedication to the events industry and the sector is amazing. But just, made some really good friends in the events industry. One of the things I think about events themselves that is so compelling is just how there's a real intensity to doing events work, isn't there? You've got an immovable deadline. If you've got a big event, you can't push the deadline back. And they're really, really public, So, I was working for an association, and our annual conference, that was the big thing where all the members came, and any mistakes that happen are really public. Everyone sees them. And so there's a real intensity to the work, and it's so focused. And I kind of love that thing that when it comes around, when the event rolls around, the couple of weeks beforehand and at the event itself, it's that kind of all hands on deck. Everyone just puts everything into it. And I think that's that can forge some really strong friendships and relationships. And I just think it's really compelling place to work, the events industry.
Yeah, I know. Everybody I ask always has that, but I like to get a little bit deeper because I think it's easy to say the people, but I think it's nice that you kind of expanded on that a little bit and how it's different. I think is really interesting. Good. And always a fun question, like, how do you explain to your family and friends what you do? Because I always find people struggle a little bit to explain what the event industry is and kind of your role in the middle of that.
Well, I guess I've got my elevator pitch for business. So I just kind of say something like that, I have a little software startup and we make software for the events industry. It helps people who run conferences and trade shows to organize all their speakers and get them onto the right stage at the right time. And I usually say something about that. But I usually find that once you mention that you're doing software, people either are like, oh, brilliant, I'm in tech, or their eyes start to glaze over and you can see you start, I'm losing the room here, I'm going to stop. So I usually try to keep it fairly short, and then, put the subject of conversation back onto them and ask them about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good technique for any kind of conversation. So not just that, right? Good stuff. And what about, so events, you're trying to make events better. You're trying to make conference programs better. Tell us about an event that you were maybe part of or produced or maybe attended, and why was it so great, or maybe it wasn't so great, and you could tell us why you think it wasn't so great.
So I guess the event that sticks in my mind the most, whenever people ask me about this, like, tell me about an event you've managed. It's this one which I ran it. It was at Gilwell Park in London, it's the home of the Scout Association. So it's this big kind of like a big outdoor space. I don't know. It's let's say it's 50 acres or something like that. So what's that? 25 hectares. Quite a big site. Right on the edge of London. Lots of outdoor space. They have various kind of dorms and that kind of accommodation. So I'm running this event, which was over the course of a weekend. So it's from Friday afternoon through till the Sunday. Probably about 500 attendees. There are lots of temporary structures that we're putting up on site. So there were like marquees and yurts and teepees and all sorts of things. So it's got the feel of a festival, but in all those tents, there are actually workshops rather than bands performing and stuff. So it's a cross between a conference and a festival. It's like a conference in a festival setting. And it's residential. So some people are camping, some people are in these dorms. So we've got caterers as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm working for a tiny charity. So we're doing it with zero resources and a few volunteers. And so this is the event, which is the kind of founding story of Lineup Ninja, really. So the way the event works, the program starts on the Friday afternoon. You've got a few speakers doing a few things on Friday afternoon. Then there's like a big party, like Kaylee on the Friday night, where everyone comes together and they'll have a dance and stuff. And then Saturday and Sunday is kind of full day of workshops. So the show had got off to a good start, and it's Saturday morning. It's like early September. The weather's amazing, beautiful sunny day. The vibe's really chilled. Everyone's relaxed. And I'm thinking, right, okay, all the main stuff to worry about is out of the way. I can relax a little bit now. Things are up and running. All the crew know where they need to be. The numbers were right for the caterers. They're all happy. Speakers all seem to be they know where they're going. I can relax. And just at that point, I hear this kind of, my walkie-talkie crackles into life, and I hear this kind of like, Joe, you better come down to reception. There's a guy really kicking off down here. So I'm like, oh, what's going on there? Okay. And because it's such a big site, I'm quite a long way away. So I kind of head over to reception. It takes me about 4 minutes to get there or something. By the time I get there, I'm getting to reception, and there's this kind of like a bit of a sort of hushed, stunned silence where the crew on reception are just kind of going, yeah, that bloke was a bit mad, wasn't he? What's going on there? And so I get the backstory. And what happened was basically one of the speakers turned up on the Saturday morning, went to register and said, oh, yeah, I'm one of the speakers, blah, blah, blah. And looked at the timetable and discovered that his talk had actually been scheduled on the Friday afternoon, and he'd only arrived on the Saturday morning. And he got up at 6:30 in the morning, got a train from Manchester down to London, and then walked the last mile to get there. So he was really hot and sweaty and quite agitated, and then discovers that he's missed his session. and completely understandably, really frustrated, really angry, and just kind of let off steam at the reception desk and gave them a hard time. Unfortunately, the reception desk was in the same space as the refreshments in the cafe. So there were a few people there having coffees, like just general delegates who witnessed all this. Also, my chief exec at the time was trying to form a strategic relationship with this speaker, and that got completely torpedoed. And the whole thing was my fault, basically. It was because I had been scheduling all the sessions. in the run up to the event, like the week beforehand, one of the other speakers who was originally supposed to be speaking on the Friday got in touch and said, I can't do the Friday anymore for whatever reason. Can you swap my session to a different time? And I'm in that week before the show. I've got 1,000,001 things to do. I'm sending final numbers to the caterers. I'm making sure that all the bed allocations are right and that people are in the right gendered dorm for them and all that kind of thing. And I just swapped these 2 sessions over and failed to check that the session that I moved from the Saturday to the Friday, that was going to be okay. And actually the speaker whose session I moved had already told me that they couldn't get there till Saturday morning. So it's all my fault. It caused all these problems. And that was when I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this than just with spreadsheets. And so that's how Lineup Ninja came about.
Wow. That's quite a story. I like it. It really explains the issues that I think event organizers have. And I think it also explains that idea that one small change to your event program can have massive repercussions that aren't necessarily obvious. And I've had a lot of conversations with people being very upset about any changes, and sometimes you don't really understand what those changes, how they can impact the event.
Yeah. And it was, I hold my hands up, completely my fault, but it was a very easy mistake to make. It was too easy to make that mistake. Really. So
thus you try to create some tools that make you able to stop those mistakes, or at least manage things in a better way.
Yeah, and just have confidence that all that stuff is kind of being taken care of by the software, rather than worrying about something. There might be some little issue lurking in the agenda that's not going to come out until on the day itself. So
And so just briefly, how does Lineup Ninja solve this? Right. I mean, we've mentioned it's kind of programming conference software, but what does it do that's really clever that really stops you from making these mistakes?
Okay, so without wishing, I'm not going to try and plug the product too much, but so essentially what it does is you've got your call for speakers forms, which I guess you'll see in any kind of abstract management type software, or you might be doing it with Google Forms or Jotform or one of these form-based platforms. So Lineup Ninja gives you all that, but it understands what those answers mean. So if you ask a question on our form that says, which days of the conference are you going to be there, it'll stash that in the database. So when you then schedule that speaker's talk, it's keeping a track of their speaker's availability. So it'll say, oh, don't put Bob on Friday because he's not going to be there on Friday. He's going to be there Saturday. But it can also do things like, and this is more useful for the exhibition organizers. Let's say you've got speakers who have offered to do a presentation, and also you want to put them on a panel, and maybe they're going to be, I don't know, maybe they're judging like a startup competition as well. So you might have people who are doing several things throughout the show. It also makes sure you don't put them in 2 places at once. So it's just tracking all that background data. You can capture things like what resources do you need to deliver your session. So another issue I've had in the past is where we're doing workshops in marquees and that kind of thing. I've had a speaker turn up and say, oh, well, I want to show some slides, and you put me in a white marquee that's really bright. No one's going to see my slides. So that's another thing you can track with Lineup Ninja. You can just capture all those practical needs and make sure that everything's scheduled in the right place, really.
And so am I right in saying it's kind of like builds the conference puzzle for you in a sense?
Yeah, that's a lovely way of putting it. Yeah. I guess rather than thinking what's different for the event manager is, rather than thinking, I'm going to put this session at that time and then this one at that time, you give it the rules to say this speaker can go in anytime as long as it's not Friday and as long as it's on one of the stages that's got the track for this session, for example. Mm-hmm. So just give it all the rules, and then Lineup Ninja can track all that for you and make sure you don't make any mistakes. Or you can just click a button and it'll build the whole thing for you.
And then you can go in and see, maybe I don't like that one there. I'd like to move that over there. And then if it allows you to move it. And so, I mean, speaker availability is obviously one of the important rules. What other rules are kind of really important that are built into it that you can kind of select, prioritize?
It's pretty configurable, actually. So now we've got as the product's getting more, we're developing it, and it's has got more complexity in it now. A lot of that stuff is user configurable, so you can define your own labels for things, and then associate scheduling rules with those labels. So, for example,
without getting into the technical side, what do you think are like the most useful ones out of those, or what are the ones that you would recommend your clients to focus on?
So, I guess track is often a big one. So, if you want to have all of your technology sessions on the technology stage and all of your marketing ones on the marketing stage, you can do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If you are allowing your speakers to have different AV, or maybe you've only got live audience polling on one session on one stage.
So one room has a big stage or has more AV or has some more advanced stuff. The other one doesn't, or the others don't. You can kind of say, hey, I want these speakers to be in the big room or to have access to these things.
Yeah. And there's another benefit that flows from capturing that information about what speakers need to deliver the session, which is, if you know that a speaker needs a projector, live polling, and Wi-Fi to deliver their session, when it comes to the day of the event, let's say there's a problem where the Wi-Fi goes down in one of the rooms, you can go into Lineup Manager and say, okay, what's the effect of that? If we turn Wi-Fi off in this room, it will then show you all of the sessions that need it. So then you know either, oh, actually, nobody needs Wi-Fi, it's fine, we don't have to worry about it. Or you can say, oh, crap, Jenny's session at 2 p.m. is going to need Wi-Fi, so we need to get it fixed by then. Or we need to move Jenny's session into another venue. So
you can kind of view it without editing, without making edits to the program, but you can kind of just check what happens if kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So.
And would you say that it is, obviously this is a bit of a trick question, but is it something that planners can use by themselves, or do they need you kind of by their side to explain them how all this works?
I'm going to give you a diplomatic answer. That really, it depends on the confidence of the organizer, like the technical confidence. So some of our clients, they'll pick it up because we've got quite extensive documentation as well. So there are FAQs on a lot of these features. So some clients will pick it up and they'll just be like, great, I understand it, I get it, and they're off and running. Some clients need or want a lot more handholding to help them build confidence. We usually find that even with those clients that, they're on Slack to us, or they're emailing us or phoning us all the time saying, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? By about the 9th time we've sent them a link to the docs with the answer to that question, they're either consulting docs or they've just got enough confidence with the platform. So after a couple of shows, they've gone through that steep bit of the learning curve and they really understand what we're trying to do with the product. And then that's really useful because then at that point they start giving us all the kind of feature requests and saying like, why doesn't it do this? Or have you not thought about making it do that? Which is great because it's all, they're all suggestions that we can then build into the product and give more value.
Yeah, it does sound like that is a sort of common issue with any sort of event tech, right? I think there's a desire from the client to have a lot of hand-holding most of the time, but then they may not be able to afford, the kind of service or support kind of all the time. But also, ideally, you kind of want to get to that stage where they have some confidence and can jump in and edit things and kind of manage things as they go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it is a challenge for event tech companies that, in an ideal world, we'd all love to be selling software as a service type, it's all self-service, it's all subscription. We never even talk to the client and we just get their money, Speaking really frankly, that's what a lot of software vendors would love to be able to do. But the events industry isn't like that, And I guess I alluded to it before. Running events is so stressful, and event managers have such a broad portfolio of responsibilities that they need to be able to get some good quality support from their vendors because they haven't got the headspace necessarily to learn all this stuff, especially for like the first event. So I think the service component is super important in software for the events industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So, Joe, I mean, obviously, this has been an interesting almost 2 years now of pandemic. How has it been for Lineup Ninja? I mean, is it a tool that you can kind of use quite well on the virtual side as well? And is that what has been happening, or has it been kind of quite challenging for you?
I think we've been super lucky. I mean, not quite as lucky as some of the event tech vendors, but you can use Lineup Ninja whether it's a virtual, hybrid, or physical event. Obviously, we designed it originally for physical events, but anything where you've got complexity of scheduling speakers, really, it doesn't matter how it's being delivered. For physical events, you need to make sure that you've got people on the right stage at the right time. But for virtual events, you might need to, for every session, you might have like a pre-record and then like a live delivery of that session, possibly with live Q&A. So for a given session or for a given speaker, you're scheduling 2 sessions for that one session. So there's more scheduling there, a bit more complexity. And also where if you've got like global, if you're drawing your speakers from a global pool, you've potentially got speakers in various time zones as well. So then that's an additional layer of scheduling if there's any live delivery by those speakers. Because you might want to make sure that you're not getting up Rachel in Australia. You don't want to get her out of bed at 4 a.m. if you can avoid it. So there are different scheduling challenges, but they all have scheduling challenges. So Lineup Ninja can help in both situations. What we found with the pandemic was initially we had quite a few clients lined up. We'd sold, a few deals and had a few contracts due to start. And initially, there was just a big wave of cancellations. So business just kind of dried up overnight. And then everyone was so busy just figuring out, well, what does a virtual event even look like? How do I deliver one of those? What's the business model? What are the platforms that allow me just to even deliver a virtual event? Nobody was at that point was really thinking about, well, how do we streamline our speaker management admin? Like that wasn't front of mind for anyone. So the inquiries dried up as well. So the first 6 to 12 months of the pandemic was quiet for us. And we were really lucky because we're such a small team. We're still a young, small startup. So our cost base is tiny. And we were able just to basically wait it out. We didn't have to lay anyone off. We didn't have to put anyone on furlough. We didn't have any investors to keep happy. We could just kind of take a step back and just watch what was going on and see how we could help with the challenges that people were telling us about. And that's what we did, really. And then towards, the last 9 months, things have really started to pick up as people are starting to look beyond what's my virtual platform, and they're looking at the whole tech stack and looking at how they can drive efficiency. Okay. And also, as people are gaining confidence that physical events are going to come back. So, we're already working on shows for 2023, for example.
So let me understand this. I think things last 6 months have picked up because people are booking in-person events, but also some virtual events are, I guess, becoming more professional behind the scenes and need more tools than just sort of the streaming tools that are kind of taking advantage of that. Yes.
I mean, I think there are maybe a couple of trends going on behind the scenes, several trends going on behind the scenes. One is that, there's this initial, when the pandemic first hit, quite a lot of organisers made staff redundant. So there are quite a few organisers now working with smaller headcount and fewer skills than they used to have. But as there's this shifting focus towards hybrid delivery, there's more complexity. So the challenge is getting bigger, but the skills and resources with which to manage that is reducing. At the same time, there's been this massive adoption of tech in the events industry. And so organisers are more familiar with tech and more familiar with the idea of using tech to solve problems. And so as they're looking more broadly across their whole tech stack, then they're seeing, okay, this tool looks like it could save us a lot of time. It's worth looking at. So, yeah.
That's kind of interesting because, it does feel that, the hybrid complexity in a way benefits at least you and Lineup Ninja in terms of people needing that extra help. So, I mean, I think this is very interesting to talk about the challenges that are happening right now. I mean, we've talked about the complexity of hybrid. Are there any other big challenges that you're seeing currently in event production, be they in person, virtual, or hybrid?
Well, I think fundamentally there's still actually a lot of uncertainty arising from COVID. So we're not out of the woods yet by any means. And so I think that's really the fundamental thing. No one's really quite sure what the world's going to look like when the dust settles. And lots of people like me will tell you that they are certain about it. The future is definitely going to be 365 communities, or everything's going to be virtual. And a lot of what we say is going to be colored by what we're trying to sell you, right? But actually, fundamentally, we don't really know. There's still a lot of uncertainty, I think. I think that there is a loss of skills in the industry and a loss of capacity of skilled people, and that's a challenge. And there's going to be that need to deliver more with smaller teams and with fewer resources. And then, as always, there are these constant challenges in the event sector, which are stress, mental health, well-being. It's a super stressful job, organizing events. That hasn't gone away. In fact, it's probably got worse during the pandemic. Climate change isn't going away, so sustainability is still a massive challenge for events, and I think there's a lot of work to do there to really crack that. And I guess another thing that's been happening over the last couple of years, well, it's been happening forever, but the last couple of years have brought it into more sharp focus, is the challenge around diversity. And for us, it's diversity of speaker panels, right? We're still seeing a lot of white blokes up on stage talking about stuff, and that's got to change. We need to see more representation from other groups, different people. He says one white bloke to another.
Yeah, the irony, right? So how do we change that? I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, and I completely agree. Is it just a conference organizer, making rules saying that there has to be people of different backgrounds and etc. Speaking, or are there any other ways to tackle that?
Well, I don't profess to be the expert on this. I think there are some great initiatives, like people like Ashanti Bentildieu at Diversity Ally. So that's a really good initiative that she's putting together there, where they're helping to deliver training to the events industry on, how to tackle the diversity challenge. Because, a lot of events organizers are the starting point is, well, actually it's difficult when our speaker panel is usually like a load of CEOs or C-suite executives. And when we look at that population of people, they are very male, they are very white. So what do we do about that? And, I think Diversity Ally have got quite a lot of smart answers to these kind of questions, and they've got a lot more experience in this than I have. We're starting to see the emergence of things like, I know there's a new speaker agency in London called Spectrum Speakers, where they're specializing in diverse speakers. And they're very specifically trying to get away from diverse speakers coming to speak about diversity. So, this is about people who are coming to speak, experts in your field, but they just happen to not be stale, pale, and male,
Yeah.
And without wishing to give you too much of a product plug, we're working on some stuff behind the scenes at Lineup Ninja to allow organizers, when they build their whole agenda, to be able to filter for things like protected characteristics. So you can say, well, how white is my panel? Okay, right, everyone's white. Okay, maybe we need to do something about that. Because I guess there's a whole kind of small p political question there about, do you have quotas or not? And
without getting into anything like that, but I think it's interesting, and that's what I was hoping you'd say. Not that I knew that you were working on that, but I think it makes a lot of sense that you can check on the diversity of your speaker lineup, and I guess you need to have that data go in some sense, right? And that's relatively sensitive data, so I don't know what rules are around that, but I imagine you have a lot of other sensitive data going into the speaker management anyway. So having a ethnicity or a gender or some other form of tracking that diversity, I think could be really useful.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And even if it's just to be able to report on it, so that as the event manager, you can say, well, yeah, we're tracking this stuff. We're asking our speakers to optionally provide that information, because obviously you can't coerce people into giving it.
Yeah, and I think because you also do the tracks, I think that could be quite interesting, because someone who's attending an event may only see sessions from a specific track. Mm-hmm. And if that one track ends up being all white male, even if the event has a lot of other, a lot of diverse speakers, their impression of the event will probably be all white male anyway, right? So I think it would be interesting to also analyze it per track and say, is the technology track all white males? Okay, let's find somebody who's not an all white male to have a different perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. I need to capture that for to make sure that goes into that feature goes in.
Good stuff. Cool. What about the vision of the future of events, right? I mean, this is something we constantly talk about. Our next big event will be the future of the event industry. What is your vision of the future of the event industry? You already talked about there's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody has a crystal ball that's 100% correct, but any insights into how you're seeing it develop? And I'm particularly interested in how you think it's going to change, right? I think there's a sort of part of the industry that's very keen to go back to normal in some sense. I think a lot of us also feel that normal is a bit subjective, and normal is not necessarily, possible, or going back to where we were isn't necessarily positive. I think in terms of sustainability and other things, there are big improvements that I think we could do. What's your vision on this, or where do you see us going?
Well, I think I'm going to start with a caveat, which is, because there is so much uncertainty, and because I'm only really speaking to our clients and our prospects. So I'm engaging with a relatively small sample space of the events industry. So I think anything I say should be seen in that context. What I'm hearing from some of our clients, particularly like the trade associations who are involved in much more traditional industries. So let's say people in the construction sector, for example. What I'm hearing from them is our users are not remotely interested in attending virtual events. They just want to have their annual get-together. It's an opportunity for them to get out of the office, to go somewhere, see a new city. It's a bit of a kind of, it's like a reward. It's like a kind of incentives thing. And really,
yeah, the reward of travel and hospitality just isn't there when it comes to virtual events, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you don't get that same buzz from sitting in your kitchen on the Zoom call. And so what I'm hearing from those kind of sectors is that, we're just waiting for things to go back to normal. And yes, there will be some improvements or changes, that some things will stick from this pandemic time, but really a lot of people are just, I'm sick of doing Zoom calls. I'm zoomed out. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to go back to how things were. I don't think things will go completely back to how they were. I'd be surprised if, some changes don't stick. But then other sectors are completely different, particularly anything that's there's a lot of innovation or a lot of tech adoption. I think we're seeing, an example might be, so Event Tech Live, for example. I think they've been pretty smart in terms of how they've responded to the pandemic, because they've had this really good show in London for a number of years. The pandemic came along and they did a virtual show in London. And then they did this US and Canada show, which is a virtual only show. And they've now announced, back at the last London show, they announced that they're now going to Las Vegas next year. So they've kind of used their virtual event as a way to start to open up a new geography for their physical event. So they've kind of used it quite strategically, but they're not going to be purely virtual in that new geography. So it's going to be a bit hybrid, but it's I'd be surprised. I guess basically what I'm trying to say is there will be diversity. There's not going to be one change that everyone's going to adopt. And we've just got more options for event planners to draw from, and they will do what is appropriate for their audiences.
In terms of specifically, things related to Lineup Ninja and the things that you work on all the time, are you seeing any significant changes on how conference programs are being put together?
I'd say the biggest change is, where people are doing hybrid events. And so they've got a physical program, and then they've got some speakers dialing in from around the world as well. And that brings a bit of extra complexity, but that's probably the biggest change. And I think that makes a lot of sense for certain audiences. And that's probably it really from our point of view. Apart from that, a lot of it stays the same. You ask speakers what they want to speak about, and then you decide yes or no. Then you decide when and where they're going to do that, and then you tell your attendees about it. It's in that respect, it's a relatively predictable workflow.
What about the preparedness of speakers? Because I have this feeling that when you're doing a virtual event, it's a lot easier to be less engaged with it. You're not traveling for 2 days, to get somewhere and kind of, if I'm speaking at a physical event, an in-person event, then I tend to stick around. I go to sessions, I participate in the event. If I'm speaking at a virtual event, I'll dial in, 15 minutes before my session, do my session, and we'll probably just go back to my work. Right. And also I find that when people ask me for my presentation, or when people ask me for a lot of details on the session, I'm not necessarily as prepared, or I kind of do it very last minute, which I imagine then would cause you on your end a lot of trouble in terms of having the data to be able to work on the puzzle, right, of all the sessions. And so I'd like to... Are you seeing this as well? Are people kind of leaving it more last minute and creating the puzzle more last minute, or not?
I'll be totally honest. That's not something I've heard from our clients, that they're really struggling with everyone being really last minute. I think the kind of last minute slide deck submission thing has always been a challenge, and as a speaker myself, I've been guilty of it plenty of times where, and I'm the guy who makes the software for speaker management, and I'm submitting my slides like half an hour before I'm on stage. So if I can't get it right, we're all guilty of it. So I think that's just a perennial challenge for organisers, corralling your speakers and getting. We can give them the tools to help with that, but ultimately it's a bit of a kind of. Some organisers really lay down the law, and they're very assertive and say, well, if you don't meet this deadline, then you're not speaking. But that'll only fly with certain speakers. If you've got VIP speakers, if you've got, chief exec of some big company that's a leader in your sector, then you've got less bargaining power to be able to say, you're not allowed to speak anymore. So,
yeah, and I think it's, who benefits the most, or who is getting the more out of? Is it the event because a star speaker is coming in and that makes them look good, or is it good for the speaker to be at that event? And hopefully there's a nice match between those two and it works well. But I find a lot of times there isn't, and I think events do kind of hope that the speakers are going to be very influential in driving traffic and driving people in. And for a lot of the speakers, especially, if you're not getting paid, I think a lot of the speakers just, well, this is a little bit of a thing that I do, but if I'm not treated well, then I may not stick around, or I may not do that. So I think it's an interesting dilemma, and I think it also comes back down to when speakers are being paid or not. The types of sessions, if it's a keynote, I think it's a little bit different from a sort of breakout session. So all those different categories. I'm very just curious about how you're seeing that, and it doesn't sound like it's changing too much, but the issues around the kind of power dynamics have always really been there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Joe, thank you so much for talking with us and being on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the experience, and I would certainly like to get your insights on the areas that you're really diving into deep. And I don't know too many people diving into conference management in the same way that you have, so we appreciate that.
Thanks.
We want to ask you the question that we ask everybody on the podcast, which is to recommend a guest to be on the podcast.
Okay. Well, I'm slightly guiltily that I don't know who's been on it in the past.
That's okay. I don't think your suggestions. Well, the chances we have had one person say someone who's already been on, but the only one time.
Okay, so I would recommend either Sophie Holt from Explory, because I think the work that they're doing, because they are talking to lots of people like event organizers, audiences, sponsors, exhibitors, and so on. They've got a really broad understanding of where the trends are going. So I think she's always got really, really good insights that are worth listening to. And Laura Lee White, she's the founder of Spectrum Speakers, who are the ones who are doing the more like the diverse speaker agency. So I think she's got a really interesting story as well.
All right, two future guests of the Event Manager podcast. Thank you for that. Yeah. Very good answers.
Cool. Well,
great.
Thanks for
Where can people find you? So where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and what you do?
Just go to lineup.ninja, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Joe Atkinson.
Perfect. Thank you for being our guest today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Miguel. It's been great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Event Manager podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest news and the best articles on technology and innovation in the event industry, head over to eventmb.com.